Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Jerome with the Radical Independent, and I'm here. Well, here we are, the Radical Roundtable, Episode 2, a short but enlightening discussion over some major topics in the news. After the smashing success of Episode 1, was there any doubt we'd come back for a round 2? So today, in our esteemed panel, we're joined by Kimber Fountain, a libertarian philosopher, author of multiple history books, writer for the Independent Political Report, and a professional speaker. We have Dr. Timothy Redmond, an award-winning educator, author of over 100 articles on critical thinking and politics, as well as a book on political tribalism in America, how hyper-partisanship dumbs down democracy and how to fix it. And Dan Griffin, a self-described political atheist and co-host of the Libservative Show, which can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Everybody, thank you for being here. Of course, I'm Christopher Jerome, a nobody with a Facebook page. That's my shtick.
You sell yourself too short, sir.
So everybody, thanks for participating. It's awesome to have you. Before we jump in, I just wanted to, I kind of did something last time, so I guess it's a tradition now. I got to show you guys a meme that I put on the Facebook page yesterday. I got to get some input. I got to see how you guys feel about this. So I'm going to share this, and you give me a rating. 1 to 5. 1 terrible, 5. It's incredible. I mean, it's a little edgelordy for what I usually put up, but I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence.
I saw this one when you posted it, and I liked it. I give it a 3. I give it a 3. Right? You know, not like insanely like blow my mind funny, but yeah, it definitely has it.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
I give it about a 3 myself, Chris, but it's only because Greta Thunberg is no Sophie Cunningham, so I'm just going to say that right off.
Yeah. She was the one I did last time. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence with something like that. I mean, I think it's kind of funny, but then again, I could see how people kind of might take it the wrong way or whatever. I don't know. I think I'm 0 for 2 with the with the memes, but I'm not a meme guy, even though it's Facebook and that's kind of the thing. All right. Well, we're gonna jump into our main topic. Kind of like I said, piggybacking off of the previous topic, America 250, which we talked about last month. Maybe dig a little bit deeper into the Declaration of itself, right? So after 250 years, conflict, compromise, it's still considered, right, essential political theory, kind of the starting point for a lot of arguments about what kind of country we're going to have, what kind of country we should have. And if you look at a lot of the polls, I think there was several America 250 polls where large majorities were saying that government's not fulfilling the founders' vision, right? Serve the common good, be guided by the people, saying elections aren't doing the job. So let's go a little bit more into that, particularly part 2. So generally, the Declaration's got 4 parts. The first part is sort of the preamble, which kind of explains, in the course of human events, right? They kind of establish that, why they're writing it. And then part 2, which is sometimes called the natural rights of man, that's one we're going to focus on. Of course, part 3 is the biggest chunk, right? That's all the list of grievances. And part 4 is just the last little paragraph resolution. But I kind of wanted to get into the second part there. That's the juicy part, the part that most people quote, that people remember. Should I try to recite it? I know I'm doing a lot of talking here.
I'd like to hear that.
I actually have it printed out because I'm a big dork. So,
oh my God, I should have.
Want to recite it?
No, I want to try. I know I'm not going to get
it. Exactly. And I can follow along and see how well you do.
This is the paraphrase condensed version.
Just say you did that to yourself.
Ready? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, and when the government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it. I know I skipped a part because of the consent of the governed, which is my favorite part that I kind of wanted to talk about today. I actually skipped that. I don't know. I think I give myself a D- already. All right, so
you did pretty good. No, you did great.
Close, right? So let's get into that. I feel like there's really I don't know. There's probably 5 or 6 really interesting points, and you guys can go with wherever you want to go with it. But we have the people are created equal. All right, that's a bold statement. A lot of things we can go with that. People are born with natural rights, right? Unalienable rights. That's incredible. They it sort of identifies life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and that's an interesting discussion because most people don't really understand pursuit of happiness, and there's different interpretations. That the one of the key purposes established here of government is to secure those rights, and that the government derives its power, its just powers, from the consent of the governed. That's super important. I kind of want to get into that a little bit myself. And then when the government becomes destructive of these ends, it's up to the people to, or the people have a right to alter or abolish it. The right to revolution, basically. I mean, you don't have to go that far. It says alter and abolish. It doesn't necessarily say revolution, but I think that's definitely implied, right? So a lot of different things we can discuss with this. There's a lot of contemporary battles. You know, you read there's 10 different books. Each one's going to kind of have its own little interpretation of what it says and what it means, and some of it's pretty cynical, and it kind of gets into the motives and the beliefs and critical analysis of the founding generation. But who wants to start it off with something related to that?
Well,
I sat at the back of the class, Chris. I'll go last. Go ahead.
Fair enough.
Well, I think that the fundamental premise that is often missed is that, again, this government, our government, was created to protect the rights that are inherent to every human on the face of the planet, you know, no matter what country you're born in, right? And we've kind of digressed so much into the fact that that we think the government gives us rights, you know, and so that I think there's a big disconnect there, and that we've kind of lost the plot on that. And the only other thing I would say is that I'm quite the optimist when it comes to the founding fathers, and so you know the one thing we can rail against their personal choices and even their philosophical ones and professional ones. But at the end of the day, we really have to understand that these men created a document that actually ultimately corrected the very blind spots of the men who wrote it. And I think that's pretty incredible as well. So, so I just checked off the very first one on the list.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true that a lot of people they don't quite understand that, oh, the Constitution's giving you rights, or the the government's giving you rights, whereas it's more that could sort of be an aspect in some ways, but when you're talking about your natural rights, your fundamental rights, and you know those you're born with, and it's the government's job to protect those. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I guess I've arrived at what I think is probably a pretty controversial take on this, maybe.
Oh yeah, bring it.
and one that definitely does not align with the view of the founders. I want to believe in natural rights, but and for a long time did believe in it, but I'd be interested to hear if you guys can convince me otherwise, because I sort of think Jeremy Bentham was right when people were talking about natural rights and he called them nonsense. Well, he said natural rights were nonsense, and then unalienable natural rights were nonsense on stilts. And I think that our rights do come from government, because I think. And I know the difficulty with that, and why the framers wouldn't want to believe that, because if a government gives you rights, then the government can take those rights away. And that's of course what they were living through with the British. They would point to these documents, the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights or whatever, and say, hey, we have these certain rights, and those rights weren't being respected. But I guess, like, where do those natural rights come from? And what are they, right? And no one through the centuries has really been able to me, like, satisfactorily explain that, or I think define that. I think what Bentham says is we would love for there to be natural rights, but wishing there was something is not the same as them actually, like, being there.
Right.
And so I do think that idea that, the line all men are created equal. I believe that we're all born in the same way. Every human has been born the same way, and we're all born in that sense equal. But I guess like Bentham argued, so what does that mean? And why do you have a right to life, right? Unless the government passes a law that says like murder is illegal, and then you have that right to live. And then it's up to the government to kind of enforce that, you know.
Do you mind if I
But
ask a question at this
yeah,
point? So if government is responsible for giving us rights, then what rights did humans have before governments existed? Because the human race has existed long before organized government, and we can even point to the Native Americans that occupied this land before we took it over, and they had some semblance of it, but it was definitely not the universally organized system that we have now. So I think in order to recognize the rights that we are born, I do believe it takes a spiritual perspective to do that, not a religious one, but a Gnostic, enlightened perspective that we have a purpose here as humans, that we are not humans on a spiritual journey, that we are spirits on a human journey. And so it comes from that because back before governments were created, people still knew that it was wrong to murder someone. Because what I believe is that there's actually two types of morality, right? There's natural morality and then there's man made morality. Well, natural morality is very succinct, it's very easy. It's don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, that your rights end where and your rights begin where mine end, right? And so you have that's natural. We're all born knowing that it is wrong to hurt people. I truly believe that. We're born knowing that it is wrong to infringe upon the privacy, even if we didn't have a word for it back then, of other people. But then on the other hand, where that has gotten convoluted is with man-made morality. Now, man-made morality is expressly the jurisdiction of religion, right? And as much as they want to say that these rules were passed down from some sort of deity, the truth of the matter is that they're all man-made. They're all man-made interpretations. I'm not born knowing that it's wrong to smoke a cigarette or that it's wrong to drink alcohol. Those are man-made rules. And so I think when you frame it in that perspective and when you realize the knowledge and the innate wisdom with which humans are born, that we often stray from thanks to society, but that you realize that there is a tangible quality to humanity that exists beyond man-made structures like government.
yeah, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. I think humans, we evolved to have a set of, I don't know if you want to call it moral principles or whatever, right? We can cooperate. We feel empathy. We feel bad when somebody we love is hurting, and we have a natural tendency to share. And, so I think that we evolved those like moral emotions because they helped us survive, because we're a social species. So if you don't have those, we need to live in groups in order to survive and thrive. And if you don't have those moral emotions, right, then no one's going to want you to be in their group. But I think the problem is, before we had government, we lived in small kin-based groups, and so it was much easier. Those moral emotions were much easier, I think, to live up to in like a small family-based group. But then as soon as our society started getting bigger and you're living with strangers and so on, we don't extend those moral values to people not in our group. And that's always been the challenge of humanity, right? So, I mean, even if you go back and look at hunter-gatherer groups, they tended to be moral within their groups, but they were constantly fighting with other groups. Today it could be different countries or different throughout history, different races or different religions. Even in like the Old Testament, where the Ten Commandments is thou shalt not kill. And then in the next chapter, it's like a lot of killing happening, right? And some people see that as like, well, how can, you have this thou shalt not kill, and then you're going and killing people because they weren't part of the in group, right? So it was thou shalt not kill was you don't kill within your community. And so I think we have those moral emotions, but they apply to a very limited group. And so I think like again, it's like when you start to think about larger societies, it was when governments came along that once you start having governments, then you start seeing law codes that start telling people you can't kill those other people, you can't take those other people's possessions. And I think that's when you start getting, quote, rights, when you start having duties. When, like, if I'm going to live in this community, I have a duty not to kill you. I have a duty not to steal your stuff. And in so doing, you now have a right to property, where before we were hunter-gatherers, it was like, yeah, if my group is starving, we're just going to kind of go into your territory. You don't have a natural right to that territory. We're just going to go in and steal your food. You don't have a natural right to that food. We're hungry. I don't care if you're hungry. I'm going to try to feed my family. And so I don't know. I guess I've just always struggled with that, like because I guess a and I think we struggle with what are the actual natural rights. Like even Jefferson in the Declaration is like life, liberty. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And nowhere is there like a list that you could go. And if it was, I don't know. So I just think we kind of, as our societies evolve and change, we sort of come up with new rights, and we say, well, you have a right to this or you have a right to that, and we argue and debate them, right? And some people would say you have a right to end your life, and some people say no, that's immoral. You have a right to an abortion. No, that's immoral. We have a right to kill people who commit violent crimes. No, that's immoral. I think if these things were like natural, we wouldn't maybe debate about them or disagree about them so much.
Yeah, I
But
don't
see
know.
that there again. Oh, sorry. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, I mean, it seems true that as societies got larger, nation states, this and that, you had a lot of political philosophers, political theorists, and you had Hobbes and Locke, and that was probably sort of the as as we live in these larger societies and the government has to oversee these areas, we start asking a lot of questions. What kind of legitimacy does this government have? What type of government what should government look like? And at the same time, what powers should the government have? And what powers do the people retain? So you have like Hobbes, the state of nature, where liberty is absolute, and anybody can do anything to anybody. That was a nightmare, right? So he kind of the benevolent dictator type thing, sort of, simplifying a lot here. But then you got Locke, who kind of goes into those more natural rights, and these are actually civil liberties in the parlance of America, right? We have civil liberties, which are thought of like as a human being, you have these liberties. And then you have civil rights, which is kind of a different thing, not exactly the same. But the idea that you're born with these rights, I think that comes into play as the societies got bigger, like you said, and we start having to figure out, well, what can the government tell me to do and what can it not tell me to do? We have to start answering these questions. And so through good reasoning and philosophical thinking, we've kind of, I guess, yeah, come up with these ideas that we have certain rights as people, and we maybe don't know them all, but this is what we think at this point. I'm there. I don't think it's as objective. It's not molecular biology, right? I don't think you can say this is what it is, end of story. Don't have to deal with that anymore. We figured it out, right? I think it's a
Yeah.
continuous process.
Chris, I think it's important too to kind of bring in the colloquialism of the time as well. So when I think of rights today in 2026, the simplest definition that I give for what a right is simply anything that doesn't require the money, time, resources of another. Essentially, I'm sure there's probably some exceptions in there, but the colloquialism of the time has kind of bastardized what a right is. My right to use whatever bathroom I want, or whatever the thing is. So I guess what I would say is, if we're bringing in the way we look at rights in 2026, this may or may not have been the language that the founders would have used, but essentially rights are created to protect us from government. So to Tim's point, I
Mhm.
mean, you could argue that rights are man-made. Absolutely. You could make that argument, because I mean, why would we need rights to protect us from other men? So I think that's kind of what Tim was getting at in a way. Maybe I misinterpreted that. I'm probably the idiot of this panel, so correct me
Well,
if I'm
I
wrong.
I also think, just to kind of go along with that, and then maybe Tim can speak to it. But there's this issue of, well, you have you have civil liberties, you have a natural right. Okay, is it absolute? No. So we run into some issues there, because it is a little bit contextual, a little bit situational, because you have, right to free speech. Does that mean you could say anything you want, anytime you want, anywhere you want without consequence? Not really, but it means we have high protections against the government limiting speech, especially political speech, right?
But
So,
see, there's the thing you said, without consequence.
yeah.
That's where free speech comes in, right? Yes, you can say anything you want, but where the right has gone unhinged is thinking that we're trying to suppress their speech by giving them consequences for what they say, and so yeah, so you can't, I think you have to separate those two consequences. There is for yes, you can say anything you want, but the flip side of that right is the consequence, right? And I think that's true with all of the rights as well. Sorry to jump in like that, but had to get you while you were hot. So
I would just, to put a bow on it, I guess, with Dan, yeah, you summarize, I think, at least where I'm at right now, my thinking on it is, it's, and even with the US Constitution and our civil liberties, like, why do we have those civil liberties? Because human beings said, this is your list of rights. And when I say our rights come from government, I mean, at the time of the founders, that kind of was like a dirty word or a terrible concept, because they saw the government as corrupt. But, with our Constitution, like, we have the rights that we do because, the consent of the governed, and we the people, and we consented to that Constitution, and so we said these are the rights that we have. And I just think that's kind of how it works. And as societies evolve, when that was first written, that really didn't include women, and it didn't really include, black people. And now it does, because later generations were like, those rights are too limited and we need this. Or whenever the Supreme Court reinterprets, what is an unreasonable search and seizure? What is free speech? That has shifted over the course of history. And I think it's just, you know, it's people kind of muddling through and saying, okay, and now this is a right. It didn't used to be, but now this is a right. And um, I mean, I guess, I think a lot, like Jefferson thought these things were just sort of out there, and they needed to be discovered. And as soon as we were reasonable enough, we would discover them. But I don't know, it just seems a lot more kind of muddling through, ad hoc. Things change as our perceptions change and our moral sensibilities change. And I think it's just people,
well,
Yeah.
and maybe it's
and
a perception thing as well, because I don't see it as the government gave women the right to vote. I see it as the government stopped disallowing women to vote, so maybe that's a perspective. I don't see them
Mhm.
as giving African Americans their rights. I see us protesting against the government to stop keeping and oppressing, an entire race based on the color of their skin, so it's a matter of framing it to me too. So that's, this is a great discussion, but I
That's a
think
good point.
there's
That's
that
a good
Yeah.
nuance
point.
there.
Yeah,
And there's
and
also, oh, sorry,
it's
Chris.
that line in the Declaration. The purpose of the government, paraphrasing, is to secure these rights. So we are
Right.
kind of muddling through, figuring it out, and as we get better, we kind of use the government. That's its job. We're gonna now, its purpose is to secure these rights. And I mean, what good are your rights if right? What good are your property rights if there's no courts, right? No laws. You have to have that structure. So yeah.
And Chris,
Does it
there's
have,
another thing too is like there's obviously vagueness in a lot of the terminology that both the founders use and we use today. Like Tim said, unreasonable search and seizure. Well, what the hell does unreasonable mean? Um, shall not be infringed. Well, what does infringement actually mean? I as a more libertarian minded person, I take these things to be extremely literal. But somebody else that's not that way might not take them to be
That's
extremely literal.
actually, I think, the brilliance of it.
It's the brilliance and the bugaboo. I agree.
Because if you just set something in stone, how long is that going to last? They in the Eighth Amendment when they talk about
Cruel and unusual.
yeah, what the heck is cruel and unusual? What's unusual now is different than it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So these things evolved and they're almost always added to, never taken away. And so I think it's genius. It gives a flexibility. And we're
It's what
kind of
makes it
getting
a
into
living document,
yeah.
exactly.
Well,
the
we're
Constitution.
yeah, it's if you just lay it out black and white and say this is how it is, I mean, it's not going to last beyond one generation, right?
Yeah.
So, I we're kind of getting into the Constitution, right? But
It always happens.
But actually, though, isn't that a perfect segue into consent of the governed? Because if the governed are the ones who are creating the evolution that changes what's a right and what's not, then that is directly tied to what the power of the government should be, right? So that kind of sends us in, because right now, consent of the government. Are you serious with the gerrymandering? We have representatives picking their voters
right.
instead of voters, picking our
Well,
representatives. It's out of
don't
control.
get me started on that. That's the whole thing for the radical independent, right? The
Uh,
the disconnect.
yeah,
I'm all about free, fair, and competitive elections, and I call it the corrupt rigged
yeah.
duopoly, and I think it's
But
heavily
also,
distorted. But
yeah, have
that's a
consent if the elections are corrupt, right? Like
right.
that's
So
not
what is
consent.
what does the consent of the governed actually mean? Right. It's one of the self-evident truths in the Declaration of Independence. What it meant in 1776 might be slightly different than what it means today. Talking about different over time, different interpretations. Because at that time, it was more about we need to be represented in the assembly, in the House, right? That's kind of what it was. But when it came to time to write the Constitution, they actually made it much, much broader that everybody in the government represents the people, not just this one little part in a legislative. Everybody. It's basically, for lack of a better word, public opinion, right? So there was a change from the Declaration of Independence in terms of how they kind of thought about it to the point where they wrote the Constitution. But definitely one of the most important issues back then as it is today, I believe, because I think we have a broken system where the consent of the governed is heavily distorted and warped and perverted. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So, does anybody have any ideas with the consent of the governed? Then, now, what does it mean? Do we have that today?
I was gonna say, does it still exist?
Yeah, yeah. My
Questionable.
tag, yeah, my tagline has always been that most politicians have forgotten that it's their job to represent us, not to govern us. And I think that just sums up where I'm at on it. It's the power and the control, and that was not the purpose of their positions.
Yeah, what I think is I think a lot of I think we get the government that we des that we deserve in a way. And I think the consent of the governed that's the key, right? I mean, that's the whole ball game when it comes to democracy. And I guess the thing that has been like it's the focal point of my book is that we have become not everybody, but a majority have become very tribal in our politics. And so we just vote for a party. We don't vote based on issues. The parties change their positions on the issues all the time. You can see that throughout American history, and then their party members just go along with it. And so it's very hard for a government to be representative if the people don't have like any ideas, right? Or any positions on the issues. If you're just voting party, there's it's like a like a pep rally or something. It's a
It's a team
popularity
sport.
contest. It's yeah, it's not about the issues. And so, I mean, you can look at polling on a bunch of issues, and there's 70% of the American public support this or 60% support that, and you don't see that reflected in legislation because it doesn't like if you're a Democrat, it doesn't matter how well a Republican does in office, you'll never reward them for that. If you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican and a Republican does terrible in office, you will never punish them for that. And so we lose all democratic accountability because it's just about our side winning an election. And it's really, the issues are almost irrelevant. And when you have that, the true concept of we the people or representation, it kind of goes out the window. And so I just think we share a lot of the blame there. I think there's a ton of other problems, right? Gerrymandering and all of those things. But we ultimately keep like electing these folks. And it could be because the party system, the two-party system, right? We're sort of forced into choosing one or the other. And so there's a lot of structural issues as well. But I do think we've really lost a lot of that consent of the governed stuff because we don't we're we just don't hold anyone accountable. We're not really voting on issues, and therefore it's like it's kind of irrelevant.
Tim,
Ti-
you
Chris,
sound
if I
like
can
you follow
piggyback,
the
oh,
radical
sorry.
independent.
I was just going to piggyback a little bit on what Tim said because you see this a lot. You see this a lot in polling numbers with regards to Congress. You
Yeah.
know, when you look at approval rating over Congress, it's always absolute dog crap. But when you look at the polling of your representative, it often tends to be a very, very high approval rating. So we sit around here and we ask, why do we keep electing these terrible candidates? I mean, it reflects right there in the polling.
Yeah.
I don't like
Yeah.
Congress, but I like my representative. So
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
you
part
wonder
of it.
why Mitch McConnell gets reelected 67 times along with Nancy Pelosi, and that's exactly
Yeah.
why.
And that's a good and Tim brings up like and I talk about this on the page. You have that systemic structural issues within the processes and structures of the system, these systemic problems, right? But then you have that social cultural aspect where we're just not doing our job doing what we should be doing. I talk about civil discourse a lot, talk about critical independent thinking as opposed to partisan group thinking and stuff like that. So I feel like it is a twofold problem, right? You have the sort of systemic issues and then you have those social culture issues that you kind of need both, right? I don't think we can change anything without both of those.
And the people, the people in power, they want to stay there, and the system that they set up, they know how to win in that system. And I mean, I think if you look at Poland, I haven't looked recently, well, super recently, but gerrymandering is not popular. And at the end of the day, consent to the governed, we can have a constitutional amendment. The people could bring pressure, on their elected officials to propose a constitutional amendment to deal with gerrymandering. If if that happened, I think what you would see is this massive mobilization of party leaderships telling each side
Oh
why
yeah,
it would be bad and why it's going to help the other side. And then people would sort of become tribal and sort of then, oppose it.
yeah,
And we have to overcome that just blind devotion to our political party uh, to truly have like the mindset of the consent of the governed and this ties into pursuit of happiness, like what is best for everyone, what is in the best interest of our nation in the and for our community. And we just don't really have that because it's all about party at this particular point.
well, another one is term limits.
And
That's another one that uh, always polls at over 70%, 75%, and a few people within the duopoly might talk about it during elections, but they'll never do it. It's just that part of that disconnect where high popular opinion, people generally want to see something happen? Nothing on the other end. So, and I feel like this is an issue that even the founders knew about as they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, right? They knew elections, they're naturally suspicious of democracy to an extent because they knew elections could become toxic and lead to corrosive political landscape, dysfunctional government. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing today. So I want to throw something out, see what you guys think, because this is something I've kind of toyed with for a while. And I interviewed a guy recently who's from Sortition, USA. And I'm like, that's because what does consent to the governed basically means representation, shorthand. Well, what does representation look like? What can it look like? And we're so focused on elections, and I feel like the parties have broken the system in terms of our elections. We can get back to better elections with, election reforms or whatnot. But what about sortition? This is basically that's kind of the people who invented democracy basically use sortition, kind of like a lottery. You got a pool of people, and they, sort of like jury duty in a way, right? You go do your time, you go serve, you do your
A
thing.
lotocracy, if you will.
Well, yeah. Would we be better represented? Would that take out a lot of the toxic dysfunction within the emotional tribalism, within our, the current way we do things? I'm not saying it has to take over and everything needs to be sortition, but some things, some areas, I think we need to get back to more of a nonpartisan government, number one. Like how a lot of our local elections used to be. Do we need a mix? Is that something? We're not going to say, oh, the Senate's going to go be sortition based, right? That's not going to happen. But can we start local, move up, work it? Can that be part of a solution?
Well, I think just as important as election reform is an abandonment of the binary, right? I think what's perpetuating this insane tribalism that we've seen and really just super heated up in the past decade, I guess, or a few years, is that there's just two. I mean, when you do the research and you look at the makeup of governments from, around the world, we are at the bottom tier of governments with our exact 2.0, number of political parties. There's even, countries in Africa that have 2.1, on the scale of ranking the influence of parties. And so but that's like, how do you do that? Again, like election reform, they can promise it all they want, but they're the ones that are keeping themselves in power. So I don't know how we break through that. But I want to see, I think that the tribalism, it might not seem as destructive if it was a little bit more spread out, I
Yeah.
mean, if we had 10, 15 political parties, because then you would be forced to compromise and to focus on the consent of the governed and not just the consent of your party as well. So
And we don't practice what we preach because
yeah.
experts go out and talk to other countries and our diplomats and this and that and tell them, hey, you guys should probably do it like this or do it like that for legitimacy reasons, for a variety of reasons. These are probably the ways you want to do it. And this it's like not what we do, It's just interesting that we give out this advice. But I think there's a ton of election reforms. I talk about it on the page all the time, which can kind of break up the power the duopoly has over elections and government. We don't have to get into that, but I think sortition's kind of out there, and it's an interesting idea, and maybe it needs to be part of the conversation. I don't know. You
It's
guys
up
have
there
any
with
thoughts?
it's up there with the ranked choice voting idea. I
Yeah.
see good and bad with ranked choice voting. I will play. I don't necessarily believe this, but I will give a little bit of pushback on what on sortition maybe actually being a little bit more against consent of the governed, because it kind of seems like being actually able to go out and elect your representative is a little bit more consent of the governed than some lottery pick getting to be your mayor or whoever, whatever position. I don't necessarily believe that, but as I was kind of looking into the idea, I saw that come up quite a bit.
Yeah, I think there's an the potential for a move. Well, uh, I don't know, Chris, if when you've been looking into this, like if you're familiar with James Fishkin at Stanford in deliberative democracy, but he's been doing this for, my gosh, probably 20, 30 years all around the world. And I just got a chance in early July to go to DC and sit in on one of his sessions that he did. So basically, what he does is he gets a random sample. So the big one they did was several years ago. They got a random sample of 500 Americans, and they all expenses paid, flew them down to Texas for like a long weekend.
Is that the Helena
And
Project? Sorry, is that the Helena Project?
they called it America in one room.
Yeah, yeah. I've actually
Yeah.
linked to that on my site. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. But what they do is, so they have all these, you have a random sample of America. And but then the interesting thing they do, they give you a bunch of issues, and it's like a pre-test post. What are your views on all these things? What's your opinion on all these issues? And then they give you like a briefing book with the pros, like the people on this side of the issue, these are their arguments. The people on this side, these are their arguments. And then they have the people read through those, and then they have experts on both sides of the issue, and the people can ask people like those experts questions, and then they deliberate in small groups, and then they ask them their opinions after. And it was anonymous, but they found like drastic changes in opinion, and some of it, some, had movement towards the middle, like liberals everyone basically becoming more centrist. But on other issues, there was still like the gap between both sides shrunk, but it was like, I think on, I can't remember all the issues, but maybe like immigration, or no, it was DACA was one of the issues, and which dealt with immigration, but like for dreamers or for kids who are brought here legally by their parents, and giving them a pathway to citizenship. And like liberals were really in support of it and conservatives were not. But then afterwards, liberals became even more supportive, but conservatives became like way more liberal on that issue. And then there were some economic issues where liberals became way more conservative. And so like there was these just massive shifts, like 30 percentage points, 40 percentage point shifts in people's opinions, because they were just like probably hearing arguments from the other side for the first time. And it's not a perfect process, but I think if you do it in the right way,
Yeah.
you can have at least that group of people become much better informed and more focused on the issue rather than the party. Now, what has happened in other parts of the world where they've done this, when they have that group, then that group says, this is what we think you should do, and they send that recommendation to the government. And then the government can act on it or not. And in many places, the government has acted on it and said, okay, after this, we've had this deliberation with with our group of citizens, and they recommend we do this, and so we're going to do that. In other places, they don't take up the recommendation. But you could do something like that where you have a random sample of Americans deliberate about something and then sort of make a recommendation, and then the government can take it up. It's not randomly choosing your elected officials. You still elect who you want to elect, but it would be a different source of information that people could maybe see, okay, when we remove this from like the political feeder and we actually really inform people, and you hear both sides of the argument, and you can ask experts on both sides of the argument, what do you think about that issue now?
Well,
And
that's basically how Congress is supposed to be, right? In
Mm-hmm.
theory,
right. Yeah.
that deliberative, that very sort of reasonable deliberative. I'm familiar with the first big one they did. I think it was 5, 6 years ago. And they
Yeah.
got the people together, and you think, oh, getting people, all these different variety of people into one room and have them talk, it'd be chaos. No, the opposite happened. There was a coming together, not necessarily agreement on all things, but there was much more understanding, a lot more connection, more solutions oriented,
Mhm.
problem solving based. So that was my big takeaway. Not necessarily that they can maybe recommend legislation or whatever. That's a cool, interesting maybe follow on. But just the idea that if you remove people from the toxic dysfunction of the duopoly that has broken incentives and tribal emotionalism and all the ways the duopoly has manipulated us and the system to fight each other and hate each other. When the structures matter, you put them in the right structures, good things happen. And a bad system will beat a good person 9 out of 10 times, and we have a bad system, and we can't get anything done. We're not a solutions-oriented enterprise anymore.
You know what I got out of that, Chris? What I got out of that was Ron Paul was right. You have people on the left moving more fiscally conservative, and you have people on the right moving more culturally liberal.
It's interesting. Yeah, pretty much.
And I think there's another aspect to it as well that I was thinking of when Tim was speaking, is that yes, I believe a lot of it was probably about the factual information that these people received, but I think what I felt was probably even a bigger yet intangible factor in the swings and the large percentage shifts was the humanity. Right? You're
the
learning
personal,
these things from another person who is just like you. That's what we strive for, is that commonality. Like I've often said, if I saw a Republican in the street bleeding, I wouldn't stop and ask if you were a Republican first before
take off that red hat or I'm not helping you.
I mean, there are people that might do that, but I wouldn't, and I don't think that the majority of people would. So you're right. The soullessness of the internet and social media it does bring us together in a lot of ways, but there's other ways where it has just completely eroded the humanity of what's really going on. This is a human issue. These are not just, the lines on a ledger or a spreadsheet, that have to get solved.
That's
yeah,
a huge,
Kimber
huge point.
is right about that. Like they really couldn't tease apart, okay, so how much of your opinion changed because of what you read in the briefing book or, the conversation you had. But a lot of people talk about hearing people's stories that, because you're bringing, like, one of the interesting things they did on the first night, they're like, how many people are in a high school? Because they went to a high school that had over 1,000 students, and some of the kids raised their hand, and you could hear like gasps in the group from kids who are like, your high school had 1,000 kids? And they said, how many high schools had under 100? And a bunch of kids raised their hand. And then you heard gasps from the other kids, like, you have less than 100 kids in your high school? And it was just, these kids meeting really like these rural kids meeting these suburban and urban kids for the first time and hearing their stories and what their lives are like. And that has a huge impact for sure.
Yeah. Empathy breeds experience. Experience breeds empathy. Like that is the foundational element of empathy is experience, for sure. And it helps to, especially when there's another human sharing their own experience as well. Absolutely.
All right, everybody. I think we're gonna have to move on to our last quick topic. So last time we talked about the World Cup that was going on. As a matter of fact, the U.S. game against Belgium was like 10 minutes after we stopped recording, and they promptly went and played terrible and lost, and so we jinxed them, unfortunately. But that was interesting. Did anybody actually get into it? Like I watch and enjoy it, or was it just like it's something? I'm just curious because within my circle we kind of got into it. I mean, did you guys have similar experiences, or was it just kind of something that was going on in the background?
Watched, but I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. Mostly because the U.S. team basically went out the same way they always go out of every World Cup, with a few brain farts that cost them a few goals. So, watched, didn't really enjoy it though.
Yeah. I feel like it's a game where you got to really know the clubs and the leagues and the players, and to really get into it a lot, you have to have like a lot of knowledge. But just watching it and the level of competition, I did like it. Now, here's a roundtable poll of the day. Will soccer catch on more in the U.S.? Did this instigate a little something, or is it just gonna?
I think we have room for more sports. I mean, why not? Why not? I don't know. I don't see it having like a huge dramatic impact. There might be a little uptick, but we're pretty married to our football and baseball here. And so I don't know.
I would say probably not, only because, and I was only 6 years old at the time, but the same thing happened in 1994
Yeah.
when the World Cup was here. Everybody thought soccer or European football was going to take off. It never did. I think there are reasons for that. I do watch a little bit of European football, like the league play. And the way they do it over there is they have a ladder system in their leagues,
Yeah.
which means if you finish at the bottom of the table, you are demoted to the league behind you,
Yeah.
and the top three teams in the league below you come up, which means that having a really crappy team, you actually still have a lot to play for at the end of the season because you
Yeah.
don't want to get demoted.
Right.
And that's something we just don't have in American sports. There's too much money in MLS to with the billionaire owners to do something like that. However, there is a smaller league that my local Detroit team plays in that is implementing a ladder system starting in 2027, 2028. So I'll be interested to see how that goes.
Dan, you're a sports guy. You got a sports background. I knew you'd have some
Yeah.
good thoughts there.
Yeah, I got you. I got you. I'm here to pick it up.
As a Detroit fan, I can definitely see why he would like encouragement when teams are at the bottom.
Nice.
It's all rigged anyway.
It is, especially with the sports gambling now. It's almost like sometimes it's just not, I don't know. I feel like it's, I never used to feel like it was rigged until like the past 5, 6 seasons, especially watching the NFL. And I don't know, it's tough, but whatever. It's to me, it's just entertainment. And I like to watch athletes at the peak of their physical performance because I believe it's a spiritual experience too, to be that in tune with your body and, your athletic intelligence to do what they do. So
I don't think it's rigged like WWE or anything like that, where the outcomes are predetermined, but the leagues absolutely put their thumb on the scales.
Oh, yeah.
You will not convince me otherwise.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think soccer it needs to catch on big time in the colleges. I think that's really a big thing where it's all club play now, right? And that's a dead end basically in terms of developing good players in proper leagues. So I think if it ever becomes a big deal at the collegiate level, I think you'll see a bigger push in serious pro leagues. All right, but that
It's
wasn't
just a
even the
game
big.
where we don't have the best players in the world. That's really what it is. There is a little bit of American exceptionalism there, where we don't have the best players in the world in soccer and we do everything else. So that's part of it too.
All right. That was the side trip to their last radical roundtable. The actual last topic, and we'll keep it pretty brief, but I just want to throw it out there, is the Odyssey. Just because 6 months ago I saw this was coming out and I thought, oh my God. I love these stories, epic stories, mythology, and Christopher Nolan's a great director. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna be amazing. So I kind of got into it. A lot of us are kind of somewhat familiar with Homer's story a little bit, right? His journey, Odysseus' journey, his adventures to get back home. It covers a lot of interesting ideas, right? There's definitely some themes there, classical, universal, basically themes. But I'll just throw this out there if anybody wants to make any comments on. You got sort of the movie's controversies leading up to it, and you may or may not know anything about that. And then you got the movie itself, if you've seen it or whatever, maybe some commentary on that. And of course, just key themes that are relevant today, right? Big ideas of, cunning versus strength, appearance versus reality, vengeance, whatever. There's a lot of. That's why I love these stories, right? And that's where I kind of think maybe maybe the movie kind of missed the mark a little bit with some of the themes that I was kind of looking for, but it kind of did some different things there. Well, any thoughts, you guys, with the Odyssey story, the movie, the controversies, or just other themes that related to that story that are relevant today? Don't all jump in at once.
Anybody? All right, I got you. I actually have not seen the film yet, but I have seen the sort of the cultural pushback on this, and I have a feeling that when I do see the film, because I will, I expect the truth to probably lie somewhere in the middle. To start with, before the movie even came out, you saw a lot of the low-hanging fruit. What's the low-hanging fruit? The casting decisions, right? I don't really care what color skin a character has, with to a certain degree. If it's an actual historical deal, like I don't think I want to see I probably don't want to see like an Asian George Washington portraying him in a movie about George Washington, but like for the most part, I don't really care. So I thought that was really, really silly. And then the the thing that I saw after the film came out was the pushback about the source material.
Mm.
There was a lot of this pushback about the emasculation of Odysseus and how he basically spent the last half of the film regretting his moves throughout the journey,
Right.
and a pushback against Christopher Nolan for sort of injecting self-hating white manness into his film.
I don't know if it was that. I mean,
okay.
That's actually the kind of the
Again,
first
I haven't
time
seen it.
that's the first time I heard that, but he definitely had sort of this soldier PTSD survivor's guilt going and just moping around, which could be a little bit of that, but that was heavy characterization with that, and I did kind of have an issue with that. The
Well, I know
casting.
that
Go
that
ahead.
was a large part of the original text, though. I have not seen
Yeah.
the movie either, by the way, because the one thing that I heard about it, well, the one thing that I know about it is that, Penelope has guests in her house for like 10 years. So to me, that's a horror movie. So but that is a big part of the original text. We think about the Odyssey, as the trials and the tribulations that he has to go through. That's what we normally connotate, that story with. But there's a whole other aspect of it, right? The end and the last part, and that is what that whole thing is about that journey and that introspection and that reclamation of what you lost as well. And so again, I haven't seen it, so Dan, to me that sounds like a very like red pilled version
Of course it is.
of interpreting the Odyssey, because it's okay for men to be contrite.
You
It's
don't want to
okay
see my
for
Twitter
men
feed,
to
Kimber.
have remorse. Yeah. No, I get you. I know. I'm not saying you're one of them. I'm saying that that's what I took from it when you said that. It's okay for, and again, I haven't seen it, so maybe they do go a little heavy-handed on it. But like Dan said, I'm inclined to think that when I do see it, it's going to land somewhere in the middle. Like I'm pretty sure they probably took that a little too far. I don't know, Chris, you saw it. What did you think about the last part?
I'm gonna say 3.25 out of 5. Maybe a hair above 3. I liked it. Competent. Christopher Nolan. A lot of good aspects. Just pretty solid in a lot of respects. But as far as what I was kind of hoping for, I was let down. Maybe the buildup was too much, but I was a little bit let down. I thought
Yeah.
Odysseus was not really all that heroic, which he should have had at least elements of that.
Sure.
Um, Minimal emotional investment, and I don't know if that's a Nolan thing or not, but it comes across as a bit cold. Um,
Yeah.
Strange tweaks how the gods were portrayed. Zeus is just a thunder in the sky. Poseidon's just like a storm on the water. I don't necessarily need like a human version of them standing there, but maybe a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe he's going for too much like realism or something, but I kind of want a little bit more, not fantasy, but maybe just a little bit
Yeah.
more mythological. It seems really grounded and rooted. Not a bad movie. I don't know what a 3.25 out of 5 equates to. Probably a C. I don't
I
know.
was gonna say you're the teacher.
Yeah, but that's math.
It depends on what the scale. If it's a 10, you're talking 32, 0.5%. So you fail. If it's I don't know. If it's 5 though, you're at a 70. So you're good. I don't know.
Any thoughts, Tim? I don't know if you saw it or not, but
Yeah, I did see it. And I liked it. I do love Greek mythology. But my favorites are really like the tragedies,
uh,
Sophocles and stuff, Aeschylus, stuff like that. But I I don't know. I liked it. I mean, I don't have any real, deep thoughts on it or
right, right.
I just I enjoyed it. I don't think it was like great, but it's not because any particular issue I had with it. I was thoroughly entertained. I thought it looked beautiful. But I trying to condense a story like that, I think some of the
Yeah, that's a challenge.
parts were obviously had to be cut really short and they got to move through some things really fast. But overall, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, solid movie. I think it was the build up and just I heard people saying it's the best movie ever, like literally talking about it being
Mhm.
as like one of the greats. And so
Mm.
Afterwards, me and my kids are kind of looking at each other like, it's good, but I don't know. I mean, maybe the bar for cinema has just dropped that low. I don't know. I don't know. It was good.
They probably said that while they were screaming at the red pill crowd on Twitter for saying the opposite.
Yeah, I don't think they even knew about any of that, but I don't know. I
Well,
don't know.
well, I don't know. The reason that your reaction saddens me though is because you would think that a movie of this magnitude with this director and would make you come away being like, wow, I mean, it's 2026. We're at, the height of, technology when it comes to producing and engineering these kind of, and I'm not a big fan of CGI. There's other ways to do that, but I don't know. It's just so it's disappointing, don't you think? Like
Yeah,
overall, like if you
yeah.
think a movie like The Odyssey with this director and Matt
Well,
Damon,
to his credit, he uses practical effects. I don't know if he used much CGI at all, so that was good. I do really appreciate that. I
I
mean,
do too.
I don't need to see another movie of like people flying in the air, throwing each other through buildings, and it looks like a cartoon. Okay, I'm kind of done with
It's a
it.
cartoon. It's basically, yeah, I'll just watch a cartoon if I want to see
Right.
that. That's how I feel.
Well, everybody, I think our time is coming to an end. I really appreciate everyone's input, contributing to another round of high quality banter. Any words for the good of the order before we sign off? Kimber, Dan, Tim, thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Nice to meet you guys.
You as well.